Good morning and welcome to our CDBG Coffee Talk. This morning we'll be discussing BABLA implementation. So, what is BABA? BABA is the Build America Buy America Act, and it was enacted as a part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is also known as the IIJA, on November 15th of 2021. The BABA requirements only apply to iron, steel, and manufactured goods brought to a construction site for incorporation into a public building or a public work. Next, we're going to discuss how HUD is phasing in the implementation of the BABA requirements. So they did a phase implementation waiver for all CDBG formula grants, recovery housing grants, and also housing and a few of the other programs. So that with the CDBG formula grants and the recovery housing program grants, if they're funded in FY 2024, BABA requirements do apply to both labor, metals, and plastic and polymer-based composite building materials, such as pipe and tube. Starting in FY 2025, all projects that meet BABA requirements and involve construction materials not listed in manufactured products will be applicable to the Buy American preference. And there's a more detailed description in our FY 2024 handbook, and it goes into detail on each category and what is considered applicable to that category. So we also give examples in the handbook. Does BABA apply to my project? So what we just discussed is that funding obligated by HUD is one of the requirements. So in the phase implementation, it depends on the date that the funds are obligated by HUD to the state. So according to our application date, all FY 2024 projects, BABA is applicable, and FY 2025, everything will be applicable from all categories. Those categories, again, as I said, are listed in the grantee handbook. And then, is it federal financial assistance? All of our programs are CDBG grants, and so they automatically apply in that category. And also, is it the award made to a non-federal entity, a state, local government, Indian tribe, or institution of higher learning, and nonprofit organizations, which also apply to our program. And then, is it an infrastructure project? The BABA only applies to construction, alteration, maintenance, or repair of infrastructure projects. It does not apply to payments or purchase agreements, which are also eligible CDBG activities. So this Build America Buy America guide is also in our 2024 handbook, and it's just a guide to help you understand if your project, if BABA applies to your project, and if so, do you need a waiver or not? So it's 6 different steps that you can go through for each one of your projects and just answer the questions, and it's a flow chart, and it will kind of give you some assistance. And also you can contact our office if you need further guidance. But it's a guide to help you understand if BABA applies to your project or not. And this is in section D of the 2024 grantee handbook. So when should you start evaluating the effects of BABA on your project? During the application phase, it is important to not only specify on the cost estimate if BABA applies to all of the materials that are listed, but also evaluate the cost of American-made products. This will help the grantee to avoid cost overruns during the bid phase. So now we require in the application that you add a column to your cost estimate to say whether BABA applies or not for each material listed. I would also recommend that you kind of look into the cost of those materials for American-made products, because some of the costs may be a little bit more expensive. And this will help you come up with an accurate cost estimate. And so therefore you would request the correct amount of funds from CDBG, because you may not be able to get additional funds later on in the process. The availability of products should also be determined by the contractors during the pre-construction phase. So whenever we're doing the pre-construction conference, this is something that should be addressed, and the contractor should start looking to see if the projects or if the materials are available and what materials are going to be needed. So there is a website to help with supplier issues. So I know as the time comes and we have more projects that BABA applies to, there may be a shortage and there may be problems with you finding out where the American-made products are, and if there is a solution to your project for you to find something in America for those projects. So there's a 4-step process. If you go to this website, it's called the NIST website, and it's NIST.gov, and there's a supply chain scouter. It's a free process. You just have to go in and say what supplies are needed. You identify the supplies, and then the NIST is going to prepare a report for you. And then once the report is prepared, they can tell you if the materials that you need are in another state or where they are, and then they can give you the contact information for you to get those supplies from that supplier. So they're kind of like a middleman to help you find the American-made products that you need for your project. And then so you would just go in to this website and let them know what your need is, and they would help work with you to get those products in a timely fashion. This is just a resource that can be used. It is not mandatory for you to use this supplier scouting, but it is a resource that's available. So contracts and bid packages. There should be language added to the engineer contract, the construction contract, and the bid package to ensure that all parties are aware that BABA is applicable and must be followed. Updates have been made to the sample bid documents and the contracts in the FY 2024 Grantee Handbook under Section D. And then OCD has also updated our contract between the state and the grantee to include BABA, which most of you have the grant agreement already from us that has to be signed, but you just need to review that and make sure that you're adhering to all of the provisions. The engineer's cost estimate. So this is the first thing that you will be reviewing BABA for in your application package. So the engineer's cost estimate has been updated to include the BABA requirements. As you can see in the example, there is a column added for BABA, and it's just a simple yes or no if BABA applies to the material that is listed. And each item for your construction project should specify if BABA applies or not. If it is determined later on in the project that additional construction materials are needed that were not included on this itemized cost estimate during the application phase, then the contractor is required to inform OCD and ensure that BABA requirements are implemented as needed. The next exhibit is D2 from the 2024 handbook, and it is the BABA material certification. The form is kind of self-explanatory. It's going through and listing each one of those materials that the contractor is using. The contractor signs off and certifies to this, and it should be someone in the contracting firm that, like one of the head people should sign this form. It shouldn't just be whoever's on site at the time. So one of the company owner, someone should certify to the materials listed, as well as your engineer for the project. And at the top is just basic information as far as your grantee name, contract number, the contractor, and the invoice period. So at the beginning of the project, when the materials are delivered, this should be included with the first invoice for those materials. The next exhibit is Exhibit D9, which is the BABA certification form. So for every project, this BABA certification form should be included with your construction documents. And we will check for this on site for monitoring purposes. And it should be signed by your prime contractor as well as your grantee. And it's just stating that all BABA's federal requirements will be followed and that the contractor is aware that this project is subject to BABA. General waivers. So there are 3 general waivers that you don't have to apply for. However, you do have to let OCD know if you are trying to use one of these waivers, because we do have to document in the file that one of the waivers were used if BABA requirements are not met. So the first one is an emergency waiver, and this applies to any urgent need project. And it has to be an threat to life, safety, or property of residents in the community. So these are only for our emergency project. The next one is a small grants, which does not apply to most of our projects because the threshold amount for these projects are under $250,000. And then the final waiver is the de minimis waiver. And so for the de minimis waiver, I'm going to go into details on the next slide for the de minimis, but it's 5% of the total cost of the iron, steel, manufactured projects and construction materials up to a maximum of $1 million. So for the de minimis waiver, this gives grantees the flexibility to waive the Buy American preference for a 5% de minimis portion of materials used in a project if it's domestically equivalent and cannot be identified, up to $1 million. So to determine the de minimis limit for a project, you have to calculate the total cost of materials used in the project and then find 5% of that total. For example, if the total cost of materials in the project is $450,000 and you are unable to locate the domestically produced material, you have the flexibility to procure up to $22,500, which is 5%, in materials from foreign sources using the de minimis waiver. OCD must be notified of the intent to use the general waiver, and please submit a request including all documentation on why the waiver is being used. And the last waiver is project-specific waivers. So with a project-specific waiver, it's available on a limited case-by-case basis, and OCD has to approve it and send it to HUD for approval. And then once HUD reviews it, they also send it to the Office of Management and Budget, Made in America office. So it's not a swift process. So we want to make sure that if we are requesting this waiver, it's needed. So there's 3 different ways that you would need a project-specific waiver. The first is public interest, and that's adhering to the BAP requirements would be inconsistent with the public interest, and you would have to prove that as well. The next one is non-availability, and that's covered materials are not produced in the USA in sufficient and reasonably available quantities or a satisfactory quality. And then the third one is unreasonable costs. Inclusion of domestically produced covered materials would increase the cost of the overall project by more than 25%. And this would also have to be shown. So if more than one federal agency is providing funding for the infrastructure project, the project-specific waiver would require coordination among all of the federal agencies to make a determination, and the Made in America office would be the one to make that determination. Due to time restraints attached to the CDBG projects, OCD LGA will only approve timely waivers be sent to HUD with substantial documentation meeting the above listed criteria. So during the pre-construction conference, it is very important that you look up these materials and see if you need to apply for a waiver and if you can provide justification and documentation for us to send over to HUD to try and get it approved as early on as possible. So VABA is new, and OCD's VABA's policies may be updated based on HUD guidance that comes out in the future. This is my contact information, and if you have any questions, I can take those now.